Hi, I'm Zibby Owens, the creator and host of the award-winning podcast that you're listening to right now. Thank you so much, called Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. It is a daily podcast, 365 days a year, and each day we talk to an author about all of the things related to their career, their book, their life, and more in 30 minutes or less, because who has time? I am now an author myself, although I wasn't when I started this podcast, and you can get my new memoir, Bookends, a memoir of love, loss, and literature, wherever books are sold starting July 1st, and my children's book, Princess Charming. You can learn more about me at zibbyowens.com, but really you're here to learn more about the authors, and that is what we're going to do. Also, be sure to check out all the other podcasts in the Zcast Podcast Network. You can learn more at zcastnetwork.com and definitely check out those shows as well. Rebecca Woolf is the author of All of This, a memoir of death and desire. By the way, I could not put this book down. I was literally walking around my house, flipping pages and walking down the street reading it. It was so good. Rebecca Woolf has worked as a writer since her teens, contributing to numerous publications, websites, and anthologies, most notably her own award-winning personal blog, Girls Gone Child, which attracted millions of unique visitors worldwide. As well as launching her own successful blog and writing weekly columns for Babbel.com, Mom.me, and Quiet Revolution, her essays have appeared on Refinery29, Huffington Post, Parenting, and more. She currently authors the bi-weekly column Sex and the Single Mom on Romper.com. She's the author of Rockabye, From Wild to Child, and the newly released bestselling memoir, All of This, a memoir of death and desire. She lives in Los Angeles with her son and 3 daughters. Welcome, Rebecca. Thank you so much for coming on Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books to discuss All of This, a memoir of death and desire.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh my gosh. Of course, now I want to pronounce it differently because as it was said in the book, it's more like you have to write about all of this, right? Like all of this.
Yeah,
So
I know.
It's like a different emphasis.
Totally. Yeah.
Okay. Can you summarize the book a little bit? And then I'm going to dive in because I just absolutely loved it.
First of all, thank you so much. So All of This is a book about my experience navigating my husband's death, which he found out he was terminally ill weeks after we had decided to split up. So I was in a very unhappy marriage for years. Finally was ready to say ready to leave my marriage. And then he was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. So as you can imagine, it was very complicated. I had come to a point in our relationship where I could barely even be in the same room with him. We weren't speaking. When he found out he had stomach aches, I wouldn't even take him to the ER because I was so done. I truly, had so little love for him left that when he got sick, I didn't even think, I was like, you're on your own, man. And then he had called me from the hospital to tell me that he had cancer, that it was terminal, that it was had already metastasized in his liver and lymph nodes. And, I got that call like 4 a.m, and my parents came up and I rushed to the hospital and I spent, the last 4 months of his life with him. And my experience navigating that was very complicated. I didn't want to be with him anymore. I didn't want him to die. I didn't want my children not to have a father. But for years I had spent I was trying to figure out a way out of my marriage. I was miserable. I was trying to make it work. I had finally gotten to a point where I was like going to be active in the ending of my marriage. And then he gets sick and dies. So, in the weeks and months that passed after his death, my feelings were complicated. I had grief. I was sad, but I also felt relief. I was free of my marriage. These were all feelings that I didn't know how to metabolize because I didn't have any examples of other women going through this, other people going through this. People were bringing me books about widowhood. There's a lot of incredible books about grief and widowhood, none of which felt like my experience. You mentioned the title before, and the title came from my husband as he was dying, saying, you have to write about all this when I die. And I kind of, in my head, originally, I wanted to tell the story of his death and my experience navigating that, but I wanted to do so through a filter that protected him, which was how I wrote all my life. I've been writing personal essays since my teens. I had a blog for many years called Girls Gone Child. I've written about my life for my whole life, but through a filter that protected everyone that I love, sometimes at my own expense, as we often do. And for me, and a lot of that had to do with the fact that he wasn't here, but it was also going through this experience made me realize how important the truth was. My entire marriage was built on lies. I cheated on him my whole marriage. The foundation of our relationship was built on this sort of idea that I was okay with being a wife, which I wasn't. I got pregnant really early. I was 23. We barely knew each other. And I sort of had, built the foundation of our marriage and our whole relationship was just me trying to placate everyone and make everyone happy. And after he died, I was like, you know what? I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm going to tell the truth. And it felt urgent for me to tell the story that I didn't have, knowing that what my experience was could not be anomalous, right? Like, I know a lot of women in unhappy marriages. I know a lot of people who are having affairs. I know a lot of people who were in my situation before my husband got sick. And I know there are a lot of people who are going through or grieving complicated deaths with partners. And it's not all heartbreaking. There's relief there and there's freedom, and all those feelings are so valid. And with this book, I really wanted to not only validate my experience, but other people's as well. So
no, keep going. That was amazing.
Sorry.
No, I loved it. There's so much in the book, and your parenthood also, and being a mom, and how you became a mom, and your relationship, particularly with your older son, and how the three of you sort of became this unit. And then the three of you were sort of there at the very end as well, and how you came sort of full circle, and you have that whole full circle Beck that sort of runs throughout. And even how you take ownership of your body again after, there's a lot of physical stuff about you in the book too, not just like sexual or sexuality stuff, but even just like the inner sort of shedding of this layer that you go into. And it's like this purging after the fact of your emotion, and like this prior life is sort of like coming out from the inside out for you too. And the way you wrote about it was just like, oh my God, you're so engrossing and beautiful. And you just feel like, I feel like as a reader, I just went through the whole thing with you and feel that sense of like relief, not relief, but just like new opportunity that was there, and how you like grabbed it. So anyway, talk more about that.
Yeah. Yes, so much of this book is really, well, first of all, I think this book, and I talked about this before, and it took me a minute. It's been out for a couple of months, and it took me a minute to sort of realize that this book is actually a love story. It's a love story about me and Hal. It's a love story about me and myself, me and my children. I think, the concept of love stories, the idea of love story, it's supposed to look very specific, where two people end up together, they're in love, they're together forever, happily ever, all these things that we think of when we think of love stories. But the reality is that most love is messy and complicated, and there's disdain and resentment, and there's pain, and there's pleasure, and there's blood and guts and death and sex and all of these things. And I really feel like, for me, going through his death and sort of this like afterlife, I've sort of fallen in love with myself, but also sort of fallen in love with my marriage from afar, only because it was sweet. So much came out of that relationship. And I think when you're miserable in your marriage, it was hard for me at the time to really find the good in it. I was trying so hard in the end to find it. And sort of after I wrote this book, it was releasing Hal, but also sort of honoring the fact that we had this weird relationship that was totally mismatched, and we didn't make any sense, but there was love there. We had these 4 amazing kids. And while he was dying, and I was basically bleeding nonstop, I had this period that wouldn't end. And I'm one of those people, and I think a lot of women are like this, where like we keep things together on the outside, right? And then like our bodies just are telling the story. So I was like incredibly stoic throughout his death, making everything happen. I had to take care of a dying husband, 4 children, navigate all these things. I was just completely on autopilot, and my body was like oh no, you're at war. So I was bleeding the whole time he was dying. And especially at the end, it was like my body was just completely falling apart. And, in the weeks and months after, I was still bleeding. And I appreciate you bringing that up, because I think a lot of people were like, why are you writing about your blood? But for me, it was that shedding. It did feel like it was this very sort of poetic, physical experience, especially because on the outside, I was just like going, just like making it work. Like, what do you have to do today? And my body was like, pfft. And in the aftermath, we hadn't had sex in years, as I think a lot of people have that experience when they're in an unhappy marriage. And so really the first thing I wanted to do after he died was have sex. And it wasn't even about like, it was more of a like primal body reaction to, I think, being around someone when their life force leaves them, which I don't think is specific to partners, probably were rare actually. But I know a lot of people who had that experience when they've lost parents or friends, is this sort of need to sort of feel your life force, because when you're with someone and their life force leaves their body, there's sort of this, am I alive? Like, how am I here? It's like this sort of surreal thing that you even have a body. And I became hyper aware of my body as his was shutting down. The fact that I had one, the fact that I'd spent years feeling self-conscious about it, about my blood, about the way my body looked, about the way my body changed as I got older. And, when you're around someone who dies really quickly and you see how fast your body goes from being a body to something else, I suddenly became so aware of all of it, of like sensations and things that I felt and like what was happening and like just different ways my body looked and felt and became so tactile and wanting to just like touch people and be touched. And so, I kind of went for it. Like pretty soon after he died, I started having sex and dating and wanting to connect casually with people and have sort of these connections that were all body, that were purely physical. Meanwhile, I was still bleeding. So that was like a whole thing too. It was like basically getting to a point, like I'd been self-conscious about like my period with, in like sexual situations forever. And like getting to this point where I was like, this is my body, like I'm in it. This is what's happening to it right now. This is where I'm at. And that was, really liberating.
I love the scene in the kitchen when you had gone on one date with a woman who made you that little certificate, like congratulations, and you burst into tears, and then you put it on the fridge, and your daughter's like, okay, so you're pan now? That's what's going on here? And you're like, I don't know, I think, and she's like, yeah, that's it. Okay, next.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's interesting because a lot of people are, the first question I get about this book is like your kids and what do your kids think? And like, I mean, you read the book, like I talk very candidly with my children about everything. We've been talking, there's nothing in this book that they're not aware of. I mean, maybe not like the details of like my periods, but I don't have a lot of shame or judgment for myself. And, we sort of have this very open communication. So yeah. So as all this was happening and I was, communicating with my children age appropriately, like, yeah, there were moments where I was like, I don't know if I want to talk about this. And my kids were like, it's this blah. And then they, like they'd sort of, it was like sort of like these things that I thought would be big deals to talk to them about ended up being like, yeah, whatever, like join, you're not special.
I think your kids must be the coolest after I read this book. They just must be the coolest kids ever. And I love so many moments that you write about are the regular moments of parenting. And I don't want to overstress the parenting because that's sort of like, just one piece of this, but, just how crazy it is after loss that life goes on and then they're still throwing Cheerios in the back seat and you still have to get them to theater camp and do all the pickups and deal with, people who were being like, I don't know, Barney or whoever you were. Well-intentioned other people whose responses are not aligned with how you feel.
Yeah.
Your kids have to also.
Well, it was interesting because the 4th anniversary of his death was this week, like a few days ago. It was right before Halloween. And my kids they wanted to go to school the day after he died. Like they went to school that day. And everyone, of course, knows that they lost their dad. And it's a sort of elephant in the room. And I wanted to be there with them when they came into school to sort of protect them from any, just so that they felt like I was with them. And it happened to be the Halloween parade when we went back to school, and everyone is in costumes and it's death. It's like this death parade, which to me, I mean, it was an incredible time to die. Like, note to self, die right before Halloween, because it feels like everyone understands how you're feeling. It's sort of this Halloween is this wonderful sort of grief party. And so it's like we come back to school after he dies, and there's just everyone's in costume. My kids are in costume. Like, nothing has happened, but it's like this show must go on sort of thing. And the surreality of standing on the sidelines after just spent 4 months in a hospital watching someone die, and just seeing these kids march down in their costumes, including mine, and waving and hi, mom. And I mean, to me, it like gives me so much peace to know that if I were to die tomorrow, or that they would be okay too. I think there's this part of losing a spouse or being around children who've lost a parent young. And of course there's grief, and of course there's trauma, but you also realize how resilient children are, how we are, that we're actually like, we're supposed to lose each other. Like, it's in our bodies to know how to handle this, right? Like, death has been a part of life since, forever. So watching the way children sort of metabolize death, and how they stay joyful and they stay sort of in the moment. And, it was really helpful for me just navigating all the different feelings I was having. And also like giving myself permission to feel joy. You're like, my kids lost their dad a day before, and they could not be more excited to be marching in a parade. So we look at adults, and if I was sort of doing the same thing, I was in a parade of my own, right? That doesn't mean that I wasn't still having all the feelings of sadness and, anger and all the things that come up when someone dies. But I also was in my own sort of parade. And I think a lot of people feel like they have to be performative in their grief, and they have to sort of bow their head and look sad for a year after somebody dies, and hide their joy and hide their relief and hide their dating relationships, because they don't want people to judge them. But do we do that with children? No. So we just need to be kinder to each other.
I totally agree. By the way, I now feel honored because I did notice the dates of everything happening. And you also said how many things happened in fours related to this book, right? He was 44.
Yes.
He was in the hospital for 4 months. You have 4 kids. And now it's been 4 years. So I just feel like it's like this perfect.
Totally. Yeah. And it's funny. I hadn't even thought about that. You're right. 4 is like, that was the number. And it's 4 years. Crazy.
Well, first of all, I'm so sorry. I should have said this from the start. I'm just so sorry this whole thing happened, that all of it happened. But that's so reductive, because obviously there's just so many emotions around the entire thing. And do you mind if I just read a couple of my favorite lines?
Oh my gosh, I'd be honored.
Okay? There's so many that sometimes it takes me a minute to find them. Hold on one sec.
I appreciate it.
Oh, well, there was this one passage towards the beginning, but I'm going to go towards the end too. So maybe this is going to take me too long, but this is about when we find out people that it happened like this. One day he was fine. The next day he was dying. We were barely speaking when his first symptoms appeared. Our marriage in shambles. Backs turned to each other in a big bed, enough to keep us from touching. You hear stories about this kind of thing happening all the time. The one about the friend of a friend who was the epitome of health. And then one day, I have done this before countless times. Someone I knew at one point in my life gets sick or dies. And suddenly, I can't believe we ever lost track of each other. I think of the time we were best friends for a summer or a weekend or during a school dance. Someone I'm pretty sure I had English with. Immediately, there's a flurry of texts with old high school friends. And can you believe so-and-so died so young? Remember when we all smoked cigs together when we were supposed to be running the mile? And it's just so tragic, isn't it? So unbearably sad. And then I grieve as if we had never lost touch, marveling at the impossible distance, the time that came and went, and all that was lost in the years we didn't connect. All the could-haves and the might-haves and the maybes. How easy it is to lose track of people, I think. How easy it is to lose people. How easy it is to lose. Oh, so good. So,
thank you.
And so many people can relate, everybody has that person, right? And when you have that deep connection, and here's another one about your marriage and the way you wrote about your marriage, and frankly, all of the stuff that's happened to you with men. Like, I feel like this is a therapist's sandbox, this book. It's like, okay, let's connect all these dots and see where we got from here to there.
Well, because I think it is all really connected, all of it. Like it's, and again, like with the title too, like this is our relationships, it's like I'm able to better understand who I am as a woman because of my marriage. And I'm better able to understand who I was as a wife because of my teens, because of my early, you know what I mean? Like this really was sort of a place for me to connect all of the different, experiences and to understand how I got here. So sorry, go ahead.
No, don't apologize. I want you to talk. You said in the beginning, when we were both struggling equally, we were okay. And I guess I just assumed if we could make it with nothing, we would always be able to make it, just like our parents and our friends and all the many married people in our lives. If they could stay together for the kids, so could we. I was conditioned to believe that as a mother who placed her children's worth above all else, I was doing them a favor. By martyring myself, I was giving my kids the ultimate gift, my happiness in exchange for theirs. Our marriage was a tourniquet I didn't think we could live without. I had convinced myself that loss of circulation in my limbs was a small price to pay, that my options were to bleed out or lose the feeling in my legs. I had become proficient in the poetry of acceptance. I mean, it's like amazing. It's just like the way you rethink all this thing, even how you were discussing. I've never read someone talk about the color, like making death into a rainbow of sorts, right? Where at the end you said, somewhere over the rainbow, red, the color of urine, orange, the color of eyeballs, yellow, the color of skin, green, the color of vomit, blue, the color of bruising, purple, the color of feet so swollen they crack like eggs. Oh,
I mean, there, and that's sort of the thing I like, this is what this book is about, but this is also sort of where I'm at right now in my life in terms of perspective, is that there is beauty in all of it, right? And there's pain in all of it. And we're so binary and we have no imagination when it comes to having conversations about any of this stuff, about sex, about death, about love. Love lives over here and hate lives over here. And we create these contradictions where there aren't any. Everything is connected and it's all mixed up. And it's, so is grief. And my experience was not abnormal at all. And yet people were treating me like it was. I mean, they're not anymore because I wrote this book about it. And I hear every day from people who are either like, oh my God, this is my story too. Or people are like, I don't understand you, which is fine. But there are a lot of us. This is not just me. But the fact that this is not a common story is a problem because there's nothing wrong with the parade, right? There's nothing wrong with having all of the feelings. In fact, like we do ourselves such a disservice by just basically performing where we feel like we need to perform and hiding where we feel like we need to hide. And we do it all day long. We do it as mothers. We do it as wives. We do it as, as daughters. We do it as we don't allow ourselves to have the full experience and to have all the different feelings. It's all complicated. Everything is valid. The rainbow of death, like it's beautiful and painful. And so is marriage and so is motherhood and just being a person. It's all hard, and giving ourselves permission to feel and to exist without shame for the feelings that we have while we're existing. That's my goal. That's like what I want for me. It's what I want for my children. It's what I want for everyone. And, it's really what I tried to articulate in this book. So
amazing. You have a lot to say about infidelity and what being in the wrong marriage can do to you, and how sometimes the people who end up cheating are the ones trying to escape something that's deeply wrong or unsatisfying or whatever, and feel they are completely trapped. And interestingly, Hal's final words were that he felt trapped himself when you were actually the one who was feeling trapped for so long. And then you have a line, and maybe I responded in particular because I am divorced and I have 4 kids. And so I don't know. You said that some of the most brave women I know are divorced, not just widowed. So talk about that.
Totally. I said the bravest women I know aren't widows, they're divorced. Yes. And it's true because, the end of my marriage obviously was passive. I didn't leave. He did, right? Like I wanted to, I had plans to, I'd finally told him that I was going to, but I didn't. And there's a part of me that's like, would I have? I mean, yes, I would have. I was at the point where I had no choice, but maybe I wouldn't have. I don't know. Maybe I would still be married. And so there was a lot that I went through when he died where I felt like if I couldn't leave my marriage and there was no, now I really realize there was no reason why I shouldn't. How many women like me aren't leaving their marriages? How many women like me are wanting to do this and can't do it? There's a lot. It's hard. It's really hard. And I know because I wanted a divorce for the majority of my marriage and wouldn't leave. So when I hear about women leaving, when I hear about women who were able to do what I could not, I'm in awe. I'm truly in awe because I wrestled with that so hard. And I think of myself as being such a tough, strong, modern woman. And yet it was paralyzing for me to all of the things that didn't have it modeled to me. There's no divorce in my family. There's it just felt, it was overwhelming to me. So the women that I know, and, I have a large community of single mom friends now, all of whom left their marriages, all of them. There was all the women who left, every single one. And yeah, they're all amazing to me. I just think women are amazing. And I feel like, because I didn't leave my marriage, I also feel like I really want to help other women who can't. And I actually had a few months back, I started this sort of, it sort of went off on it became this huge thing, but it started just as a simple question to women, knowing that so many women had reached out to me saying, I wish I could leave my husband and I can't. And so I reached out to my community on Instagram and I said, those of you who've left your marriages, do you have any advice to give for people who are trying to do the same? And I got hundreds of responses. And then it just completely blew up. And then there was women volunteering to do pro bono work. I'm in Portland. I can help you. I'm here. And it became this whole thing where I was hooking people up from different states. And then women were meeting each other and finding each other. And if you check my Instagram stories, it's called How I Left. And there's 10 of them. How I Left 1, How I Left 2. And there's stories from women. And most of them are anonymous. And I cropped their, names out for everyone's safety. But stories of how they left, advice for women trying to leave, people volunteering their services. It was incredible. And this was several months ago. And I've had people sort of sporadically reaching out to me saying, hey, just so you know, my divorce is just finalized. And I would not have left if I didn't have the resources that, those stories presented. So on the other side of a miserable marriage, and I'm sure you can relate to this too, it's when you're on the other side of that and you're oh my God, I'm alive and I'm here. And I walk into my home and I'm not dreading it. I can be there's so many things that I didn't even realize I was suffering from or through that I don't have to worry. My house feels safe, all these things that I didn't know were possible. I didn't even know how bad it was until it was over. And I just want that for everybody. because we all deserve that. We deserve to be happy and we deserve to feel, alive. And whether, that comes because of a death or a divorce or anything. I mean, it's cliche, life is short and we only have one body. And that body is aging every day. I don't know how much longer mine's going to work. I hope it works for a long time, but also I don't take for granted my health and I know how fast it can change. And I don't want to, not be joyful and in my power in my body and pleasured and all these things. I won't anymore.
It's amazing. Thank you so much. I feel like there's so much more to discuss. I had 8,000 things I wanted to talk to you about because I literally this is one of those books that I was walking, I wouldn't even put down, walking from room to room, could not put this book down. So good. I really loved it. I love the way you write. And as I said, I wish that Zibby Books had published this book. It's so good. Anyway, I hope I get to meet you at some point. Are you still based in LA?
Yeah. Let me know when you come out. Would love to meet.
Awesome. Well, congratulations. And I'm sorry it took us a while to talk about it.
No, I'm so honored to be here. Thank you so much.
It was so great. Congratulations.
Thank you, Zibby. Thank you.
Take care.
All right.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram at Zibby Owens and at Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. Also sign up for my newsletter at zibbyowens.com and sign up for my virtual book club and meet lots of authors on Zoom every other week. Thanks so much to Steve and Ryan at Texture Sound for the sound editing. And thank you to Morning Moon Productions for providing this fantastic intro and outro music.